June 12, 1854. Magnolia Plantation. People first thought it was a mistake. Then they called it a ghost story. But the truth is written in old county books, church records, and faded photographs. For nearly 40 years, in wedding pictures taken across Arkansas, the same man kept appearing behind the bride. He always wore a black formal coat, and in his lapel he always had a small flower. White hawthorn, a plant common in the region, but one that only blooms in spring, not in summer or fall. 12 different couples from 1854 to 1891 reported seeing this same figure. They didn't know each other. They lived in different towns, yet they all described him the same way. This wasn't made up. The proof is real. And it all started on a warm June night in 1854. Magnolia Plantation was a real place. It sat about 7 miles west of Lake Village, Arkansas, near a slow-moving river called Bayou Macon. By 1854, it was no longer a busy cotton farm. The owner, James McGehee, was struggling. Cotton prices had fallen, and he needed money. So he did something unusual for the time. He began renting out his family home for small weddings. It wasn't fancy, just a quiet ceremony in the parlor, a simple meal, and a photograph to remember the day. On June 12, 1854, James hosted his first and only wedding at the plantation. His younger sister, Eleanor McGehee, was marrying Benjamin Croft, a shopkeeper from Helena. Only 16 guests came. The ceremony was held under a magnolia tree in the yard. Reverend Josiah Pike, a traveling Methodist preacher whose name appears in church records from that time, performed the service. Afterward, everyone moved inside to the east parlor, a room with rose-colored wallpaper, a piano, and a rosewood settee that had been in the family for decades. For the photograph, Eleanor and Benjamin sat on that settee. Eleanor wore a simple ivory dress with lace at the cuffs. Benjamin wore his best black coat. The photographer, Silas Boone, had come all the way from Helena with his large wooden camera and glass plates. He asked them to stay still for 30 seconds. The shutter clicked once. No one noticed anything strange. But that night, in his dark room, set up in the old smokehouse, Silas Boone saw something that made his hands shake. When he developed the glass plate, there was a man standing behind Eleanor. He wore a black tailcoat, just like formal men wore in the 1850s. His face wasn't blurry because he moved. It was as if the chemicals on the plate refused to hold his image properly. And in his lapel, he wore 3 white hawthorn blossoms. That was impossible. Hawthorn trees in Arkansas bloom in April and May. It was June. No hawthorn flowers should have been fresh, Eleanor screamed when she saw the print the next morning. Benjamin accused Silas of playing a trick. James McGehee, torn between family and fairness, allowed Silas to keep 1 copy for his records, but he ordered the couple's print to be burned. Silas agreed, but he secretly kept a second plate hidden in his wagon. He wrote in his private notes, "I fear I have recorded something that should not be seen." The strange event was quietly logged in the Chico County Marriage Ledger, a book still kept today in the Lake Village Courthouse. Chico County Marriage Ledger. Page 22, June 12, 1854, Eleanor McGehee and Benjamin Croft. License issued. Ceremony performed by Reverend J. Pike. Note: groom filed verbal complaint unauthorized figure in portrait. Guest count discrepancy. 17 persons present. Ledger lists 16. No name recorded for extra attendee. At first, James tried to forget about it. But soon, small things began to happen. Things he couldn't explain. Around 2 a.m. on June 15th, he heard footsteps on the second-floor hallway. They were light, slow, and stopped right outside his bedroom door. He called out, "Who's there?" Only silence answered, then so faint he almost missed it. A whisper came from the stairwell. She wore white. He checked the hall. Empty. But the air smelled like wet soil and old flowers, like a grave after rain. The next day, his wife Martha found the family Bible open on the piano bench. Someone had underlined a verse in pencil, Ecclesiastes 9-5. "For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything." She closed it quickly, uneasy. That same week, Martha began noticing something odd with her morning coffee mug. She always left it on the kitchen counter before bed. Every morning it was filled with cold, clear water, even though no one in the house drank water from it. She never touched it, yet it was always full. Guests started canceling their bookings. A couple from Monticello wrote that they'd heard troubling things. Another said their grandmother had a bad feeling. By late July, no one came to Magnolia except James, Martha, and their housekeeper, Dinah Lewis, a freedwoman who had worked at the plantation since before the Civil War. Dinah was the first to notice the door chain. It was an old brass chain, bolted to the inside of the front door, a common safety feature in rural Arkansas homes in the 1800s, used to keep strangers out while still allowing conversation through a cracked door. James never used it, but on August 3rd, Dinah found it dangling loose, though no one had entered or left the house that day. The next night, at exactly 11:18 p.m., she heard it rattle, a sharp metallic clink, clink, while she sat in the kitchen mending clothes. She walked to the front hall. The chain was swinging gently, though the door was shut tight and the night was windless. "Mr. McGehee," she said the next morning, "something's walking in this house." James just nodded. "I know." He stopped sleeping in his bed. He moved to the parlor, sleeping on a chaise lounge with a pistol under his pillow. Every evening he walked through every room, checking windows and doors. He muttered to himself. Martha grew afraid, not of the house, but of her husband. In her personal journal, recovered in 1938 and now held at the Delta Cultural Center in Helena, she wrote, August 12, 1854, James says the guest never left, that he's been here since the wedding. I tell him it's grief. His father's death broke him. But last night, I heard the chain rattle too, and the smell like wet soil and rotting petals. If I don't make it downstairs, check the sentence ends there. On August 15th, Martha vanished. There were no signs of a struggle. Her nightgown was folded neatly on the bed. Her shoes were by the door. The only thing out of place was a single white hawthorn blossom on her pillow, its stem still damp with dew, though no hawthorn trees. Bloomed within a mile, Sheriff William H. Logan filed a missing persons report on September 5, 1854. He listed Martha as presumed drowned in Bayou Macon, though search parties found no trace of her body, and the bayou showed no signs of disturbance. Dinah Lewis told a different story. In a statement to the Lake Village Gazette on October 24, 1854, she said, "I saw her that morning. She was standing at the top of the stairs, staring down the hall like she saw someone I couldn't. Then she walked into the east parlor and never came out. When I followed, the room was empty. Only the settee, the ferns, and that smell, like the ground after a burial. James fell ill 2 days later. He had a high fever and kept whispering, 'He's in the portrait. He's always in the portrait.' When he recovered, he nailed the east parlor shut and posted a sign, 'Magnolia closed indefinitely.' But the strange events didn't stop. On September 28th, James woke to find every door in the house unlocked, even the cellar, which had no key. On October 1st, Dinah quit her job. She refused to say why, except, 'I won't serve a house that feeds the dead.' Then came the final night. On October 17th, 1854, at 6 a.m., Dinah passed by Magnolia on her way to town. She saw smoke from the chimney. She knocked. No answer. She pushed the door open. James sat upright on the rosewood settee in the east parlor, the same one from the wedding portrait. His eyes were open but glassy. His hands were folded over a blank daguerreotype plate. There were no signs of violence. The county coroner, Dr. Elias P. Green of Lake Village, ruled the cause of death as apoplexy, what we now call a stroke, often caused by extreme stress. But Dinah swore she saw something else. In her sworn statement, she said, "I saw him, standing behind Mr. James, tall man in a black coat, boutonniere of white flowers. He looked at me and smiled." The house stood empty for 2 years. Then it burned down in 1856, likely arson, though no one was ever charged. All records, photos, and ledgers were thought lost, except one. In 1923, during an estate sale in Helena, a box labeled S. Boone, Photographic Materials, was found. Inside was a glass plate negative dated June 12, 1854. It wasn't the blurred image everyone knew. It was a second exposure, never developed until then. In it, the man's face is clear. He isn't smiling. He isn't frowning. He's just watching. And this time his eyes are fixed not on the bride, but on the person looking at the photo. On you, foreshadowing for part 2. Silas Boone's journal entry found with the plate reads, "He knows he's being seen. Next time, he'll step forward. Imagine you're alone in that parlor now. Moonlight slices through the shutters. Everything is quiet. Then clink, clink, the brass door chain rattles just inches from your face. You didn't touch it. No one's outside. But the sound came from inside the house. The blank plate found in James's hands was never logged into evidence. It disappeared from the coroner's office within a week. To this day, no one knows where it went, or what might have developed on it if someone had dared to try. March 3, 1889. St. Mary's Catholic Church Parish Hall. 35 years after James McGehee died in that parlor, the same thing happened again. Not at Magnolia Plantation. That house had burned down long ago, but in a small brick building in Helena, Arkansas, the Parish Hall of St. Mary's Catholic Church. The date was March 3, 1889. The occasion, the wedding of Clara Belle Duval and Thomas Reed, two young people from respected families in Checoat County. Everything seemed normal that day. Guests arrived. A simple ceremony was held. A photograph was taken. But when the image was developed, it showed something that could not be explained and could not be ignored. This time, the figure was not blurred. He stood clearly behind Clara, wearing the same black tailcoat, the same calm expression, and the same white hawthorn flowers on his lapel. There was no mistake, no trick of the light. He was simply there. The story made the local newspaper. The Arkansas Democrat printed a short article on March 7, 1889. Local couple's wedding portrait, marred by ghostly intruder. Photographer claims plate unaltered. But the real proof wasn't in the paper. It was in the St. Mary's Parish Sacramental Register, a thick book kept by the church to record every baptism, marriage, and funeral. That book still exists today in the archives of the Diocese of Little Rock. On the page for March 3, 1889, someone added a note in careful handwriting. Entry, March 3, 1889. Clara Belle Duval and Thomas Reed wedding performed by Dr. Michael O'Connell. Witnesses, Monsieur Duval, E. Reed. Note added March 4th. Bride returned, hysterical. Claims man from 1854 appeared in photo. Dr. O'Connell inspected hall. Found coffee mug on table filled with water. No one present. Also guest ledger lists 28 attendees. Actual count, 29. Name added in different ink. J. McGehee. James McGehee had died in 1854. He had been dead for 35 years. Father Michael O'Connell was a real person. He was an Irish priest who served St. Mary's from 1881 to 1895. Church records list his name, his assignments, even his letters to the bishop. At first he thought Clara was just nervous. Weddings are emotional, he told himself. Maybe she imagined it, but the next night, he returned to lock the parish hall at 9:12 p.m. That's when he saw it. On the wooden table in the center of the room sat a stoneware coffee mug, the same kind used during the wedding reception. It was filled to the top with cold, clear water. The hall had been locked since 6 p.m. No staff had entered. No windows were open, and yet the mug was full. Father O'Connell checked the guest sign-in ledger, a book the church kept for every event. The last name on the list was E. Reed. But now, in neat, old-fashioned script, different from the others, someone had added J. McGehee. Magnolia Father O'Connell tore out the page and burned it in the church stove. He thought that would end it. It didn't. The next morning, he opened the baptismal register to record a newborn's name. There, beside the entry for baby Margaret Doyle, born March 4th, was the same handwriting, J. McGehee. He slammed the book shut. This was no longer just a strange photo. Something was writing in his records. Something that knew James McGehee's name. Something that shouldn't exist. Clara Duval stopped sleeping. She kept the wedding portrait face down in a drawer in her bedroom. But every morning she found it lying upright on her dresser. She swore the man's eyes followed her as she moved across the room. She told her mother, "He's here." Her mother went pale. She whispered, "Not again." Then, for the first time, she confessed. Her own wedding portrait, taken in 1868, had shown the same man. They had destroyed it, but the smell, wet earth, and rotting flowers had stayed in their house for weeks. This was the terrifying truth. The curse wasn't random. It followed families connected to Magnolia Plantation, by blood, by marriage, or even by witnessing the original event. If your family had been there in 1854, or married into a family that was, you were at risk. Father O'Connell knew he needed help. He went to Dr. Samuel H. Pryor, Helena's most respected physician and a man known for studying old folk beliefs. Dr. Pryor didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in facts. He agreed to investigate. On March 22, 1889, Dr. Pryor visited the parish hall at dusk. He brought a lantern, a notebook, and a stoneware mug identical to the one used at the wedding. He placed it empty on the table, locked both doors with his own key, and waited in the small sacristy room next door. At 11:03 p.m., he heard a soft clink, like ceramic touching wood. He rushed into the hall. The mug was full of water. Steam rose from it in the cold air, but when he touched it, the water was ice cold. On the table beside it lay 3 white hawthorn petals, arranged in a perfect triangle. Dr. Pryor wrote in his private journal, now kept at the Delta Cultural Center, "No natural explanation." The petals were fresh. Hawthorns do not bloom in March, and the water, it tasted of river clay, like the bottom of Bayou Macon. The photographer who took Clara's picture was Edward L. Griggs, a well-known Helena studio owner. His business, Griggs & Son, daguerreotypes and carte de visite, was listed in the 1889 city directory. Griggs kept a detailed log of every photo he took. In it, under March 3, 1889, he wrote, "Plate number 7, Duval Reed Nuptials. Developed 9:15 p.m., but plate bears internal timestamp, 9:15 a.m. Same plate shows figure clearly. Eyes open, watching, tested plate, no double exposure, no tampering. Conclusion, time discrepancy unexplained. A photo developed at night, but stamped with a morning time. Impossible. Yet there it was. The disturbances grew worse. Thomas Reed reported seeing a man in black standing at the edge of his cotton field near Lake Village. When Thomas walked toward him, the figure vanished into the morning mist rolling off the bayou. Clara began coughing at night, as if she'd breathed in damp cellar air. Her hands were always cold. Father O'Connell tried to pray over the hall. He sprinkled holy water. He read from the Bible, but nothing changed. The coffee mug kept filling. The name J. McGehee kept reappearing, in the hymn book, on the chalkboard, once even carved into the wooden pew. On April 1, 1889, Father O'Connell wrote a formal letter to the Bishop of Little Rock, asking for permission to perform an exorcism. The request was denied. Church officials said there was no proof of demonic activity, only nervous hysteria. The next day, Father O'Connell made one last entry in the parish ledger. His handwriting was shaky, as if he were afraid. He doesn't haunt the house. He haunts the record, and the record is never destroyed. Then he packed a small bag, left the church keys on the altar, and walked out of Helena. No one saw him again. Church records show he resigned his post on April 3, 1889. His final address was listed as unknown. In his final notes, Edward Griggs wrote, "I kept a second plate from the Duval wedding, hidden. If I disappear, look in the false bottom of my camera case." The date on the plate is wrong. It says October 5, 1924. That date was 35 years in the future. Picture yourself lighting a lamp in the empty parish hall. The room is silent. You see the coffee mug on the table, filled with cold water. You didn't pour it. No one's been here all night. But it's there, and it smells like the bayou after a storm. What would you do? Would you drink it, or would you run? On April 2, 1889, the Helena Police Department received a report from the church sexton. The guest ledger was missing. 3 days later, it reappeared on Father O'Connell's desk, but now it listed one more wedding. Eleanor Shaw. Robert Mills, October 5, 1924. Eleanor Shaw had died in 1919. Robert Mills didn't exist, and Magnolia Plantation had been ruins for over 40 years. November 12, 1923. The Arlington boarding house, the pattern didn't stop with Father O'Connell's disappearance. It waited, it watched, and in the fall of 1923, it called someone new. Margaret Voss, a 28-year-old archivist from the Arkansas Historical Society in Little Rock. Margaret had no family ties to Magnolia Plantation. She wasn't getting married. She was just doing her job, collecting old documents from the estate of Edward L. Griggs, the Helena photographer who had taken Clara Duval's cursed wedding portrait back in 1889. Griggs had died in August 1923, and his studio was being cleared out. Among boxes of glass plates and chemical bottles, Margaret found something strange. A small oilcloth-bound book labeled Exposures and Anomalies. 1885-1923. Inside, on page 87, under the date March 3, 1889, Griggs had written in careful script, Plate number 7, Duval Reed Nuptials. Developed 9:15 p.m., but plate bears internal timestamp, 9:15 a.m. Same plate shows figure clearly. Eyes open, watching. Tested plate, no double exposure. No tampering. Conclusion, time discrepancy unexplained. Margaret was a trained historian. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in evidence. And this was odd. She asked to see the original glass plate. It was stored in Griggs's personal safe, now in the hands of his landlord, Mr. Harold Finch, who also owned the Arlington boarding house at 312 Columbia Street in Helena, the very place where Margaret was staying. The Arlington was a real building. It had been listed in the Helena City Directory every year since 1890. Margaret stayed in room 12 on the first floor. On the night of November 12, 1923, after copying Griggs's notes by lamplight, she heard a soft thud from the basement, like a heavy box falling over. She grabbed her Eveready flashlight, model number 102, a common electric torch sold in Arkansas since 1920, and went downstairs. The basement was used for storage. Old trunks, broken chairs, bags of coal. But near the east wall, something was wrong. A section of the wall had collapsed, revealing a narrow crawl space. Margaret checked the building's original blueprints, kept at the Phillips County Courthouse. There was no crawl space shown. This space shouldn't exist, she pointed her flashlight inside. The beam cut through, dust and darkness, and landed on something that made her blood run cold. Pinned to the far wall were dozens of yellowed wedding portraits. Some were daguerreotypes from the 1850s, some were carte de visite from the 1880s. One even had a 1912 Helena newspaper stamp. Every single one showed the same man in a black tailcoat standing behind the bride. His lapel always held white hawthorn flowers. But the most disturbing thing was carved into the wooden beam beside the photos, a message in rough, desperate letters. He opens doors. The dates are wrong. Below it, someone had etched a list of wedding dates. June 12, 1854, March 3, 1889, April 17, 1912, October 5, 1924, October 5, 1924. 11 months in the future, Margaret's hands shook. She carefully tore a small corner from Clara Duval's 1889 portrait and ran back upstairs. The next morning, she showed it to Harold Finch. Finch turned pale. That crawl space. It wasn't there last week, he said. We had the basement inspected after the April flood. Nothing like that. He was telling the truth. The Great Mississippi Flood of 1923 had hit Helena hard in April, but the Arlington sat on higher ground and only suffered minor water damage. No structural changes were recorded. No new rooms were built. Margaret reported her discovery to the Helena Police Department. Officer Carl D. Briggs, badge number 14, on duty since 1920, agreed to go with her to the basement that same afternoon. But when they arrived, the crawl space was gone. The wall was smooth and freshly plastered. No portraits, no carving, only a faint smell, like wet soil and rotting hawthorn flowers. It's him, Margaret whispered. The date's wrong, Briggs replied, but he wouldn't explain what he meant. Later that day, Margaret examined the torn portrait fragment under a magnifying glass. In the figure's lapel, she saw something Griggs never mentioned. Tiny numbers scratched into the emulsion, 10.524. She booked a train ticket to Little Rock that night. But at 3:11 a.m., she woke to the sound of water dripping. Her stoneware mug, empty when she went to bed, was full to the brim. On her pillow lay 3 white hawthorn petals, still damp. She left Helena the next morning without packing her suitcase. Foreshadowing for Part 4, in her final report to the Arkansas Historical Society, marked Unverified, Do Not File, Margaret wrote, "He doesn't just appear. He steps through. And locked doors won't stop him. Imagine shining your flashlight into a crawl space that wasn't there yesterday. The beam cuts through dust motes, landing on something pale, not brick, not wood. Dozens of wedding portraits pinned to the wall like trophies. Each one shows the same man. And in the newest one, you recognize the bride. It's someone you know. What do? Do you step closer, or do you run?" On December 1st, 1923, the Phillips County clerk received a marriage license application for Eleanor Shaw and Robert Mills, with a wedding date of October 5th, 1924. The application listed their address as Magnolia Plantation, but Magnolia had been abandoned since 1878, and Eleanor Shaw had died in 1919. Her death certificate was filed in Little Rock, yet someone had signed her name on the form in handwriting that matched the 1854 ledger. October 5th, 1924, abandoned Magnolia Plantation. The wedding was never supposed to happen. Eleanor Shaw had been dead for 5 years. Robert Mills didn't exist, and Magnolia Plantation had been an empty ruin since the 1870s. But on the morning of October 5th, 1924, a tenant farmer near Lake Village saw smoke rising from the chimney of the old main house. That was impossible. The roof had caved in years ago. No one lived there. Yet someone had lit a fire. The farmer called the sheriff. Deputy Sheriff Ellis R. Cobb of Phillips County was sent to check. Cobb was a serious man in his late 40s, with a mustache and a reputation for calmness. He'd worked through floods, fires, and even a bank robbery in 1919. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in facts, and smoke from a dead house was a fact he couldn't ignore. He drove out alone at dusk in his Ford Model T. The road to Magnolia was overgrown, but the house was still standing, barely. The front door, which had been nailed shut in 1890 after a vagrant died inside, was now wide open. Inside, the parlor was covered in dust and cobwebs. But one thing was clean. The rosewood settee, the same one from the 1854 wedding, was centered in the room, as if waiting for guests. On its cushion lay a single white hawthorn blossom, fresh and damp. Cobb drew his service revolver and went downstairs to the basement. This space hadn't been used since before the Civil War. It was dark, cold, and filled with the smell of old roots and damp earth. He turned on his Eveready Model 102 flashlight, the same kind used by police across Arkansas in the 1920s. In the dirt floor, he saw footprints, fresh, leading to a far corner where a rusted coal chute door stood slightly ajar. He called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then a dry whisper, so close it seemed to come from right behind him. "You shouldn't be here." Cobb spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. For just a second it caught a figure in a black tailcoat standing by the stairs. His face was pale, his eyes deep and hollow, but his expression was calm. In his lapel, 3 white hawthorn blossoms. The air around him shimmered, not with heat, but with visible breath, even though the basement was warm and Cobb wore no coat. Then the figure spoke again. Louder this time. He's waiting. Cobb fired his revolver. The bullet hit the stone wall behind the figure. When Cobb looked back, the man was gone. But the coal chute door, which Cobb had not touched, slowly swung open, revealing not darkness, but a narrow stone passage going deeper underground. From it came the smell of river clay and rotting petals. Immersion line. Now imagine the locked door opening behind you and cold breath brushing your skin. You didn't turn the knob. No wind blew. But the air just moved, like something stepped out of the wall and stood inches from your neck. Your heart pounds. Your hands shake. Do you run, or do you step into the dark? Cobb backed toward the stairs. As he did, his flashlight beam caught words written on the basement wall, not carved, but traced in damp earth, as if by a finger moments before. "The last bride is coming." He ran upstairs, got on his police radio, and called Helena PD at 12:17 a.m. His voice was steady, but urgent. 10-524, 12:17 a.m. Deputy Cobb to dispatch. At Magnolia Plantation. Subject cited. Male, formal attire, approx. 6 FT, breath visible in warm air. Claims last bride coming. Proceeding to basement passage. Advise send Griggs plate for comparison. If I don't return, check. The transmission cut off. Backup arrived at 1:03 a.m. They found Cobb's car still running, headlights on, driver's door open. His flashlight lay on the basement steps. His revolver was on the parlor floor. And Cobb himself was inside the house, seated on the rosewood settee, alive but completely still. His eyes were wide open. His mouth was slightly parted. He didn't respond to his name. He never spoke again. The basement passage. When officers went down, they found a freshly built brick wall sealing it off. A local mason examined it and said the bricks and mortar looked at least 50 years old, as if it had been there since the 1870s, but no one had seen anyone near the house for weeks. The official report was filed by Sergeant Harlan Weeks of the Helena Police Department, on duty, 1920-1935. It's recorded as Helena Police Department Report, number 2871. The final lines read, Deputy Cobb recovered 10-6, unresponsive, found clutching hawthorn petal. Basement passage inaccessible, wall appears 50-plus years old per masonry expert. Photographed settee. Plate developed 10-7. Shows Deputy Cobb and figure standing behind him. Same as 1854, 1889, 1912. Subject turned. Face fully visible. Eyes, the report ends there. The last page is missing from the Helena PD archives. No one knows what Sergeant Weeks saw in those eyes. In Cobb's coat pocket, investigators found a crumpled note in his handwriting. She's not dead. She's the key. They believed he was referring to Eleanor McGehee, the first bride, buried in Lake Village Cemetery since 1854. On October 6, 1924, the caretaker of Lake Village Cemetery reported that Eleanor McGehee's grave had been disturbed. The headstone was intact, but the earth above her coffin was warm to the touch and covered in white hawthorn petals. When workers dug down, without opening the coffin, they found the soil temperature was 78 grader. Even though the air was only 52, something was keeping it warm. Something was waiting. October 12, 1924. Lake Village Cemetery. The truth didn't come from a ghost. It came from a grave and from a woman who refused to look away. After Deputy Cobb was found catatonic in the Magnolia parlor, the Chico County Sheriff's Office ordered an official investigation. But before they could act, Dr. Eleanor Voss, a respected physician in Lake Village and a distant cousin of the McGehee family, took matters into her own hands. She had read the police report. She knew about the warm earth on Eleanor McGehee's grave, and she knew something the others didn't. Her great-aunt had once whispered that Eleanor McGehee never wanted to marry James. She had been in love with someone else. Armed with an Eveready Model 102 flashlight and a small trowel, Dr. Voss went to the cemetery alone at 2:45 a.m. on October 12, 1924. The night was cold, 52 degrees, but the air was still. She walked straight to Plot 14, Row B, where Eleanor McGehee had been buried since 1854. The earth above the coffin was not just warm, it was steaming faintly, like breath on a winter morning. And lying on the damp soil was a wedding band, tarnished with age but unmistakable. It matched the description of the ring James McGehee had placed on Eleanor's finger on June 12, 1854. As Dr. Voss picked it up, her flashlight beam caught movement inside the Weatherby family mausoleum, a small brick tomb 30 yards east. The iron door, rusted shut for over 50 years, stood ajar. She stepped inside. The mausoleum was empty except for a stone shelf along the back wall. On it sat 6 wedding portraits, 1854, 1868, 1889, 1912, 1923, a planned wedding that never happened, and one with no label. All showed the same man in black, but the unlabeled one showed Dr. Voss herself. She wore a white dress she'd never owned, standing beside a groom she didn't recognize. The photo looked real, like it had already happened. Then a voice came from the shadows behind her. I never left. She turned. The man stepped into the light, not blurry, not floating, but solid, breathing, his skin pale but alive. He wore the same black tailcoat, the same hawthorn boutonniere. His eyes were tired, angry, and sad all at once. James McGehee died in 1854, Dr. Voss said, backing toward the door. He did, the man replied. But I'm not James, he held up his left hand. On his finger was the twin of the wedding band Dr. Voss now held. Her name was Eleanor, he said. She promised to marry me. But her family forced her to wed James. On her wedding night, she ran into the bayou. I followed. She drowned. I didn't. I became the guest who never leaves. The truth hit Dr. Voss like a stone. The dead guest was never dead. His name was Silas Croft, a riverboat worker, not related to Benjamin Croft. He had vanished in 1854 after Eleanor's death. Heartbroken and furious, he had made a kind of curse, not with magic, but with memory and image. He would appear in every wedding portrait tied to Magnolia, ensuring that Eleanor's betrayal would be witnessed forever. And because Dr. Voss was McGehee blood, she carried that guilt. "You're next," he said, stepping closer. "The last bride." Dr. Voss turned to run, but the iron door slammed shut with a loud clang. Her flashlight died. In the total dark, she felt cold fingers close around her wrist. She screamed. At dawn, the cemetery caretaker, Otis Bell, listed in the 1924 Lake Village directory, found her unconscious on the steps of the mausoleum. She was clutching the wedding band. Her left wrist bore bruises in the exact shape of fingers. The next day, the Arkansas Democrat printed a short article. "Local doctor found in cemetery mausoleum, claims living intruder in wedding curse. Authorities dismiss as hysteria. Wedding band recovered matches 1854 McGehee nuptials." But the real proof came quietly. Dr. Voss had a fiancé, Daniel Reeves, a school teacher from Helena. On October 20th, she placed the recovered wedding band on her nightstand at the hospital. By morning, it was on her finger, and in the Chico County marriage ledger. A new entry appeared on October 21st, 1924, in handwriting that matched the 1854 ledger exactly. Eleanor Voss and Daniel Reeves, wedding date November 1st, 1924. Dr. Voss had never filed for a license. Daniel Reeves had never signed anything. Picture yourself watching the truth unfold, knowing it won't stop with them. It's already reached you. Because if the curse follows blood, and you've read this far, whose name appears next in the ledger? On October 25th, 1924, photographer Henry L. Pike, grandson of Reverend Josiah Pike, who married Eleanor McGehee in 1854, developed a test plate for Dr. Voss's upcoming wedding. The image showed her in a white dress, and behind her Silas Croft, smiling. In the margin, Pike scrawled, "He's not in the photo. He's in the room." Pike vanished that night. His camera was found in the Helena River. Lens cracked, plate intact. The plate now sits in a sealed box at the Arkansas State Archives. No one has dared to look at it since. March 17th, 195, Arkansas State Archives, Little Rock. The curse did not end with Silas Croft's final warning. It didn't burn away or fade with time. Instead, it hid, in boxes, in ledgers, in sealed envelopes, waiting for someone to look again. By 1951, most people had forgotten the Magnolia wedding anomaly. Newspapers stopped writing about it after 1925. Police stopped logging complaints in 1931. Even the Catholic Church sealed its records under unverified spiritual disturbances. But the evidence never disappeared. It just got quieter. On March 17, 1951, archivist Helen M. Pryor, employee Abergir AR 114 at the Arkansas State Archives, was sorting through a box of old documents sent from Lake Village. The label read, "Chico County, Unfiled Matrimonial Records, 1850-1930. Inside, beneath marriage licenses and baptism certificates, she found a manila envelope sealed with red wax. Stamped across the front in bold letters, "Do not open. State Security Exemption OF." The seal was already broken. Inside lay three things: a daguerreotype plate from 1854A, tarnished wedding band, a rusted Eveready Model 102 flashlight. The same kind used by Deputy Cobb and Dr. Voss. Attached was a typed note on Arkansas State Police letterhead, dated January 3, 1950, per Executive Order 4812. All records pertaining to the Magnolia wedding anomaly are hereby classified. Reason: pattern demonstrates capacity to transfer via visual media and blood relation. Last known carrier, Eleanor Voss, D. 1942, Helena. Note: Voss never married, but her niece, Margaret Voss, B. 1926, filed marriage license 1949. License revoked after groom vanished. Plate recovered from groom's vehicle shows figure clearly. Conclusion: curse persists through photographic record and familial line. Do not develop unlabeled plates. Do not display images. Destroy all copies. This file to be sealed until 2024. Helen Pryor felt a chill. She placed the plate on her light table but didn't develop it. She just looked at the glass surface. As she turned to log the item in her notebook, the fluorescent lights above her flickered. The room temperature dropped so fast she could see her breath. And from the archive's intercom, a system installed in 1949, a voice whispered, dry and close. "Don't develop it." She reported the incident. Her supervisor, Director Robert L. Gaines, ordered the box resealed and moved to Restricted Vault B, a locked room accessible only with 2 keys. But the damage was done. The curse had been seen again. Survivor behavior change. The people who lived through the events were never the same. Margaret Voss, the archivist who found the crawlspace in 1923, never married. She moved to Hot Springs and lived alone until her death in 1978. Her will stated, "No photographs at my funeral. No portraits in my home after death." Deputy Ellis Cobb lived until 1955 in a Helena sanitarium. Nurses reported that every October 5, he would sit bolt upright in bed at 11:42 p.m., whispering, "He's waiting." Father Michael O'Connell was found in 1932 in a monastery in County Cork, Ireland. His personal journal, donated to Notre Dame University in 1960, ends with this line, "He doesn't haunt places. He haunts records, and records outlive us all." The rosewood settee from Magnolia Plantation was donated to the Delta Cultural Center in Helena in 1962. Staff members say that on June 12th, March 3rd, and October 5th, the dates of the 3 major weddings, the exhibit room grows suddenly cold. A faint smell of wet earth and hawthorn fills the air. No flowers are present. No windows are open. But the smell remains for hours. The McGahey name disappeared from Chicot County by 1940. Descendants changed their last names to avoid attention. One branch, the McGees of Pine Bluff, still forbids weddings in June. Their family Bible, passed down for 6 generations, has Ecclesiastes 9:5 underlined in every copy. The dead know nothing. In 1976, a journalist filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the Magnolia Anomaly file. The Arkansas Attorney General's office denied it, citing ongoing risk to public order. The file remains sealed to this day. When asked about it, state archivists simply say, "That record does not exist." On March 17, 2024, at exactly 3:11 a.m., the motion sensor in Restricted Vault B at the Arkansas State Archives activated. Security footage showed no human entry, but the camera timestamp glitched, displaying October 5, 1924 for 17 seconds. When staff reviewed the video, they saw the sealed box. Open, the daguerreotype plate was gone. Imagine inheriting the silence, a silence that still walks at 3:11 a.m. You think you're just reading a file. But the moment you pictured his face, you became part of the record. And records are never destroyed. In 2023, a digital scan of the 1889 Duval Reed wedding portrait was uploaded to the Arkansas Digital Archives for public viewing. Within hours, the server flagged an anomaly. A face not present in the original plate now appeared behind Clara Duval, clear, watching, wearing white hawthorn. The scan was deleted, but copies had already been downloaded, shared, seen. And that's the true horror. You don't need to visit Magnolia. You don't need to marry into the family. You just need to look, because once you've seen him, once you've read his story, he's no longer just in the photo. He's in the memory. He's in the record. And now, he's in your mind. So the next time you see an old wedding photo, especially one from Arkansas, look closely behind the bride. Check the lapel for white flowers. Watch the eyes. Because he doesn't need an invitation. He's already in the frame, and he's been waiting. For you, the end.